Max Neumann at the PTO European Open just put his name in history, and he is now definitely the man to beat. Forget the Norwegian method, we've got the Australian method here, as he beat the three best triathletes I think we've ever seen in a performance that we will remember for a very long time. So today I'm going to break it down for you guys and tell you how Max pulled off something that really no one expected to happen. Here we go. So starting the race off, the swim started out super hot. As you could imagine, the top swimmers in this field were going to try and get away from Kristianblummenfelt to give themselves the best chance on the bike and the run. Kristian was easily the favorite coming into this race. However, he was joined by the likes of Jan Frodeno and Alistair Brownlee, who were finally making their return to racing after so many illnesses and injuries that ruled them out of all the biggest races the last couple of years. But the person we're talking about today was ranked number 7 in the world coming into this race and has to be, in my opinion, one of the most underrated triathletes on the planet. Max is a top tier swimmer to begin with, and he was no slouch here in this race, coming out of the water at the 1 kilometer mark in 9th position, just 9 seconds down, and looking primed to be in the front pack when they got out for the bike. And that's exactly what happened. Aaron Royal led everybody out of the swim with Jan Frodeno and Alistair Brownlee in tow. There was a good group of strong swimmers here that had created quite a gap on Kristianblummenfelt, and Max Neumann was a part of it, only being 14 seconds back. Now, transitions would really matter in this race, as it is a shorter distance than a half Ironman, and every second does count. Max Neumann had the 5th fastest transition time and managed to make sure he was on that bike group going out and trying to keep away from Kristian. Interestingly enough, everyone seemed to have a smooth transition except for Jan Frodeno, who really struggled to mount his bike and get going up the slight hill, but thankfully for him, he made it and he was on with that front bike pack. Here we see the damage that they did to that chase pack swim group, with Jason West leading out of the water, but he was only a minute down and he was another big contender for this race. We also see that Kristianblummenfelt was just behind him and not that far back. I think overall he would have been happy with that swim and feeling like he had enough support on the bike to maybe bridge that gap to the front of the race. No one at this point had really won or lost the race, and everything was still up for grabs. It was about to be one heck of an important bike leg though for all of these athletes. At the front of the race, unsurprisingly, it was Alistair Brownlee and Kyle Smith who were taking turns to set the pace and try and keep the power high. Sometimes with a larger group like this, it can be hard to keep that speed going. With a 20-meter draft zone as well, it makes overtaking a big commitment. So a lot of work to be done still at the front of the race as Kristianblummenfelt got to work on the bike, and thankfully for him, his greatest blessing in this race came in the form of Magnus Ditlev, who decided, you know what, I am getting to the front of this race as soon as I can. And that's exactly what he did. Because by 21 miles into the ride, Magnus Ditlev and Kristianblummenfelt had now made their way to the front of the race, and that front bike pack, which had already lost 3 of its riders, so it was down to 7, but now with Magnus and Kristian, it was back up to 9, and we had absolutely no idea how this podium was going to turn out. We still had a lot of racing left to do. At this stage of the race, it was really interesting to see Kyle Smith taking a look back and shaking his head. I wonder if he was shaking his head at some of the other riders who weren't taking a turn and pushing ahead, or if he had just seen Magnus catch on to the back of that pack and was clearly disappointed about that fact. But that brings up a really good point, that Max Neumann, as you can see here, was always positioned about 3rd or 4th throughout the race, taking advantage of some legal drafting and not overextending himself and setting the pace at the front of the race. As you'll see later on, that didn't work out for Alistair and Kyle Smith. But then, after about 30 miles into the bike ride, the race dynamic changed completely, with Kyle Smith, Alistair Brownlee, and Max Neumann taking it to the rest of the athletes, and only Magnus Ditlev was able to hang on. they ended up gaining over a minute on the likes of Kristianblummenfelt and Jan Frodeno and the rest of that group. So a fantastic move here from these athletes that ended up deciding a lot about this race. So we've got 4 athletes at the front, including Max Neumann, but also Magnus Ditlev, who was looking more aero than ever. And I remember hearing last night from how they trained stories on Instagram that Magnus Ditlev was just clocked with a 508 watt FTP before this race. This man was looking scary, and he was in prime position to start the run. So the bike was over. Kyle Smith, Alistair Brownlee, Max Neumann, and Magnus Ditlev were into transition first, and they had just over a minute on Kristianblummenfelt and Jan Frodeno, who finished the ride together. Alistair was quick through transition, but Kyle Smith was even quicker, and they stormed off to get an early lead. Interestingly enough, Max Neumann took the little bit of extra time to put on socks in transition, but he was quickly out and was hot on their heels. Magnus Ditlev had a little bit of trouble with his shoes and had one of the slower transitions, but he was right behind Max, starting out on the run. Alistair Brownlee and Kyle Smith were like a bullet out of a gun coming into the run, with Alistair Brownlee clocking the first kilometer in 2 minutes and 57 seconds. It looked like he was back to his old form with his long strides on his tiptoes. However, out of nowhere, it seemed like the lights just went out and he was getting reeled in by none other than Max Neumann, who'd already swallowed up Kyle Smith, who was struggling, and Magnus Ditlev was also looking strong, moving up into 3rd place. But hot on their heels was none other than Kristianblummenfelt, and he was clocking some of the fastest splits in the race. But it was actually Jason West, who was running a ridiculous average of 4:40 per mile, who was running the fastest on the day. But Kristian was on the hunt, and anything at this point could happen. It was so dramatic, and if you guys missed it watching it live, I am so sorry, because this was a race to remember. Max Neumann came up looking so fresh next to Alistair Brownlee, who held on for a little bit, but not for long, and Max Neumann set about taking charge of this race. It was such an interesting race course with 6 laps on the run, so at all times you could see where the other athletes were, which made the broadcast really spectacular. From this point on, Max Neumann really stole the show as he ran through the streets of Ibiza with all the local fans cheering him on as he ran like we've never seen him run before. But Kristianblummenfelt was only 36 seconds down, and Max Neumann could constantly see him on his radar, and it was getting close. People were doing the math, and it looked like Kristian might have enough to catch Max Neumann. It was just going to be a matter of time. At this time, Ditlev had moved into 3rd place, Brownlee had fallen off the pace into 5th, and Jan Frodeno was running steady and was slowly gaining his spots as well, eventually moving up into 4th place. But he was just a little too far back and not running at the same speed as Max Neumann and Kristianblummenfelt. So it wasn't going to be a dream return to racing for Jan, but not a bad race from him. And then out of nowhere, as Kristian looked like he was gaining a little bit of time, Max found another gear to seal a performance that, like I said in the beginning, should go down in history, and to end a race that, in my opinion, is one of the greatest triathlon races of all time. It took absolutely everything Max had and an all-around performance to get away from Kristianblummenfelt and time it to perfection that he ended up only winning by 27 seconds. What a performance. This guy will never go underrated ever again in his career. He is now the man to beat. It makes it even more special because there is no national federation behind him, and to quote him in his final interview, there's no bullshit science, just hard work. What a race, Max Neumann. Hold your head up high because you just beat 3 Olympic gold medalists, including Kristianblummenfelt, who came in 2nd place, and it was Magnus Ditlev who took 3rd. The other gold medalist, Jan Frodeno, who finished in 4th place, with a speedy Jason West taking 5th. And finally, Alistair Brownlee, the third gold medalist, ended up in 6th place. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this race breakdown. I hope you guys liked it. I'm running on a few hours of sleep after doing a live watch along of the race last night. Thank you to all 600 of you who were tuning in during the race to watch along. That was so fun, and I look to do a lot more of these in the future. Stay tuned for more videos and highlights coming out soon with all the races going on this weekend. Hope you guys are having fun. We'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.